You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world. Tonight, we're going to discuss the magic of politics. This is an interesting subject, for certain. We're going to be reading from a paper tonight that was submitted to an academic journal known as Nova Religio, the Journal of Alternative and Emergent Religions, Volume 23, Issue 4. And this paper is titled, The Magical Theory of Politics, Memes, Magic, and the Enchantment of Social Forces in the American Magic War, written by one Mr. Egil Asprum. An interesting concept here. Politics, magic. Everything in this world ties back to the occult, folks. As much as I wish that wasn't the case, it always is. No matter where you look. And politics is no different. In fact, politics is the prime example that we can give for something like this. If you think the art or science of magic is nonsense, I think you need to reframe your reference point in regards to that. Now, if you don't like the word magic, replace it with what you would call causal engineering, and you have a bit of a better understanding of what's going on and how it works. You see, our modern sensibilities don't like notions like magic or these occult connotations attached to it, but certainly we will admit to causal engineering and we will admit to the psychological aspects of such things. So that being the case, we're going to look at it tonight from this perspective of meme magic at work with political events. Now, this was written back in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, it was published 2020, but it talks about the events of 2016. So let's go ahead and we'll get into this. The abstract here reads, The election of the 45th President of the United States set in motion a hidden war in the world of the occult. From the meme-filled underworld of alt-right-dominated image boards to a widely publicized binding spell against Trump and his supporters, the social and ideological divides ripping the American social fabric apart are mirrored by witches, magicians, and other esotericists fighting each other with magical means. This article identifies key currents and developments and attempts to make sense of the wider phenomenon of why and how the occult becomes a political resource. The focus is on the alt-right's emerging online esoteric religion, the increasingly enchanted notion of meme magic, and the open confrontation between different magical paradigms that has ensued since Trump's election in 2016. It brings attention to the competing views of magical efficacy that have emerged as material and political stakes increase, and theorizes the religionizing tendency of segments of the alt-right online as a party spontaneous and partially deliberate attempt to create collective effervescence and galvanize a movement around a charismatic authority. Special focus is given to the ways in which the politicized magic of both the left and the right produce affect networks that motivate political behaviors through the mobilization of mostly aversive emotions. And I'm going to pause for a second there as we wrap up the abstract of this paper to point out that it seems this writer was heavily focused on the election of Trump. Now, many of these same things happened with the last election cycle when Biden was elected, allegedly, president. And we have some of the same type of things have gone on, and we see how all of this stuff has circulated around social media, especially, and how we can have all of these different ideas present in the forefront of people's minds nowadays, especially those with a more conspiratorial view of the world. With that being the case, we need to be mindful of this stuff. There have been people in this world who have understood how all of this operates for a very long time and have decided to use some of these principles in their favor. So we have to take it a little bit seriously, I think. Although many people would laugh it off and say it's nonsense, Well, you have every right to believe that, but what you need to understand is even if you don't believe it, there's people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in these things, and the things they do to act on those beliefs will affect all of us. And we have actually seen a great deal centered around this type of idea in not only the Trump election, but the Biden election that happened after the fact. So we have all of these different types of occult leveragings going on. And I would say the ultimate in this was the culmination in what happened on January 6th, 2021. This was the invocation of some powerful deep state magic, if you want to go that route and call it for what it is, causal engineering. And it brought about a significant change in the American culture since then. Even though most people just blatantly disbelieve what they're told is the mainstream narrative about what happened on January 6th. And I've done breakdowns on that here and on other programs that I do, talking about how this relates back to the occult Feast of Fools. This whole paradigm relates back to that. That's what happened on January 6th. It was a giant occult ritual, and like I said, could deny it all you want, but it always seems to tie back to the occult. All you got to do is open your eyes and understand their language of symbology and read between the lines with many of these things and understand nothing in the political realm happens by accident. None of it. It's all planned, all with an agenda previously in mind. So even if this did have an element of grassroots to it, it was quickly hijacked and weaponized by the people who benefit from such a thing allegedly occurring. So that being the case, we can understand a little something more about this. But let's get back to this paper, and we'll look at the parallels that this author draws to the things that happened surrounding the Trump inauguration. The result of the 2016 presidential election in the United States sent shockwaves through political establishments across the world. It also marked the escalation of a veritable magic war in the occult community being fought over the 45th President of the United States and the future of the American Republic by means of spells, rituals, and memes. Just as the primaries and the campaign had mobilized deep-seated political, cultural, and value differences in the American population, so too pre-existing tensions among pagans, occultists, and magicians were activated in social media. Unlike their Muggle world compatriots, however, the occult demographic has boosted its repertoire of incendiary tactics with magic. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. I think this is demonstrable. You always have had this type of animosity and infighting between some of these occult groups, some of these various secret society groups, and not just the secret society groups, other demographics that consider themselves into occult things. They consider themselves magicians, pagans, or whatnot. These are all terms that have really been hijacked and utilized in a way that differs from their original meanings and creates a more negative connotation. And a lot of this actually has very heavy ties to what we would call the New Age movement, which was promulgated upon the world in order to make a lot of this stuff look silly and nonsensical, and to avert people's attention away from these very real causative engineering factors that are known as magic. It works. That's why magicians use it. And if you deny that, you clearly don't understand what's been going on for a very long time. And that benefits the magicians, that you don't know, you don't understand, and you don't think that they have any effect. The opposite is true, then. They have even more of an effect if you don't understand how the trick is done, or that a trick is even being done. And this is often how things can go down in this world. So you have this occult subculture that exists on the political spectrum as well. Many of them tend to lean to more left-wing type ideologies, it would seem. And we see that was one of the responses within this occult community. They actually put together covens that would cast binding spells against Trump. I do significantly remember that. I specifically remember seeing that in the news media, that these people were actually that unhinged about his election, that they did that. And of course, on the other side, you have the people who are just so pro-Trump that they are also unhinged. And of course, they utilized the symbology in ways on the internet that helped to cement some of the ideals surrounding his presidency. Of course, I'm talking about the Keck meme. And we'll get to that as we continue on, because I'm pretty sure this author talks about it in this paper. So let's go ahead and we'll continue to read. The present article is an attempt at making sense of the magic war, which, at the time of research in spring of 2018, was still unfolding. 4 questions guide the effort. Who are the belligerents of the magic war? What magic are they doing, and how do they view its efficacy? And why are people pursuing politics with magical means in the first place? While the first 3 questions are straightforward who and what questions, the 4th explanatory why question is more ambitious. A sufficient answer must proceed by seeing the magic war not simply as an internal political dispute in the magical community, although it is that as well, but rather as a response to a broader crisis of political legitimacy that has engulfed the United States and is sensed in many other Western countries as well. I will argue that the magical theory of politics undergirding both pro- and anti-Trump belligerents, from 4chan trolls turned chaos magicians to activist witches hexing the president every new moon, can be understood as enchanted interpretations of social forces that are typically unleashed during anti-establishment political mobilization in times when political legitimacy is fracturing. So I'm going to pause right there. Certainly, we have seen political fracturing in this nation since the installation of Trump as president in 2017. And certainly, we've seen it further fractured and divided with the installation of Biden as president in 2021. And of course, we had that whole debacle that went down January 6th, which was a ritual to empower this divide, this division strategy that's been put in place by those at the highest levels and echelons of control in this world. This is what they want. They want that division. They want that fracturing. They want this type of infighting. They want chaos, because that is their modus operandi, to make order out of chaos. Do you understand the concept? This is always how they do things. Before you can rebuild something, you need to tear it down first, all the way down to its foundations, and that's what they are attempting to do with the American experiment. They're tearing it back down to its foundations in order to rebuild it bigger and better. They're going to build it back better. That's what they think. You see, it's invoking the archetype of the phoenix, death and rebirth. Through fire, all nature is perfectly renewed. They are the philosophers of fire, after all. And this is what they believe, and these are the beliefs they act upon, and why they do things that they've done. So they staged an insurrection, and it was the world's worst insurrection, apparently, but they still managed to pull it off to some degree or another. And of course, when you control the media and all the propaganda mouthpieces out there, you can turn something that was really just a giant nothing burger for the most part into something major. And that's what they've done, and they're leveraging off of this, by and large. And actually what this really was an occult ritual, like I said. Back in the medieval times, it was called the Feast of Fools, where they installed a mock pope for a time. You probably never heard about that, did you? Go back and watch Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame. They actually do an entire musical skit about this Feast of Fools there, and give you an idea as to what it represents. Go and watch that, and then go back and read about the Feast of Fools. And you'll understand it's a mockery. It's mocking the American people. They've essentially initiated us into clown world officially in 2021 and installed the trickster into the office of presidency at that time. They handed us the worst that they could possibly dig up at that time and put this clown in power. Not to say the clown beforehand was any better, but you see, it's all part of the ritual. It's a giant humiliation ritual, is essentially what it's all about. And who are they humiliating? The American people, the American public. And they're fleecing us for all of the money they could get from us, and they're sending it off overseas, billions of dollars all the time, into 2 different proxy wars right now. Why? Why are they doing this? And now they're ramping up the fear for the next big pandemic situation. It never ends. These things always seem to repeat in certain ways, and there's most definitely an occult side to all of it. And they leverage these energetic principles in ways that we barely understand because we have not been trained, as many of these people have in these secret society groups. These ones that really pull the strings in this world. So we don't know what exactly they have in mind or how exactly they leverage certain things, but they've become masters of this. But let's get back to the reading here. I will draw on 2 classical sociological concepts to make my case, namely Emily Durkheim's idea of collective effervescence and the notion of charisma formulated by Max Weber. In addition, the concept of affective networking, inspired in equal measure by affective neuroscience and actor network theory, highlights the important roles that emotional associations distributed and shared via social media play in whipping up collective effervescence. This collective effervescence, on the one hand, affords translation into theories of magical efficacy and appropriate magical actions, and on the other hand, can be transformed into political capital and the desired voting behavior when invested in a charismatic political figure. Taken together, these theoretical tools may not only offer insights into how Trumpism turned esoteric and spurred its own occultist resistance after Donald Trump became president, it also points toward a general theory of magic as a political resource in time of crisis. I'm going to pause for a moment there. And don't think for a minute that this is not something they think about in the political arena. You see, you could go back and see Ronald Reagan had psychics on staff. I think it was Gene Dixon he used as his official psychic to help him during his presidency for planning. This is a well-established fact. All political kingdoms and authorities through the course of time have always had a court astrologer or always kept these types of people on retainer as advisors. And it's no different today. You just may not recognize them as such. But certainly, it's the same kind of idea. And we have seen, since this time that Trump was elected, we have seen many things shaking up on the esoteric side of things, for certain. And there are some who support one faction and some who support another faction. Like I said, it would seem by and large most of the ones that you see front and center that publicly proclaim to be magicians or pagans or witches or occultists of some sort, by and large, they tend to gravitate towards leftist ideologies. Those are the ones that are in the public limelight. Now, there's also those who have kind of veered towards this more right-wing attitude, as right-wing as Trump is, anyway, which isn't very right-wing, but still. This is the impression they want to give people. So you have these opposing factions in these different magical fraternities and groups that want certain things to manifest in this world. Some of the things these 2 opposing sides agree upon and other things they don't, much like the political spectrum of things. Oftentimes you have these opposing sides. Sometimes they want the same things and sometimes they want opposite things. So they work together the best they can to push the agendas that they want, and sometimes they'll compromise. And sometimes they'll move quickly and sometimes they'll move slowly. But their overarching goals are the same. And it's the same thing here. It's just the puppeteers infighting about certain aspects of things. But at any rate, let's read on here and see what else this author offers us as far as evidence here. The belligerents, resistance and reaction with magical means. We may conveniently distinguish the belligerents in the magic war over the 45th President of the United States by distinguishing three camps. Number 1, the cult of Keck. Number 2, the magic resistance. And number 3, the magic reaction. This is a heuristic classification only. It does not pick out stable, close-knit social groups that can be clearly identified and demarcated. Instead, it points to three phases of the conflict that stand in a chronological and dialectical relationship to one another. Taken in a broad sense, the cult of Keck refers to a religionizing turn in online alt-right culture, primarily on image boards like 4chan and 8chan, but also in a network of extreme right blogs, such as The Atlantic Centurion, The Right Stuff, and Countercurrents Publishing. This development started during the primaries in 2016. The magic resistance refers to the highly publicized attempt by people who are disaffected by Trump's victory in the presidential election on 8th of November 2016 to use spells and rituals to bind Trump and his supporters. It experienced its breakthrough into public consciousness amidst rising media attention in early 2017. Finally, these anti-Trump efforts have sparked a magic reaction, attempting to unite Trump-supporting magicians, occultists, and alternative spiritually practitioners of all stripes in an effort to thwart the magic resistance's spells. While the chronology is clear enough, it is often harder to identify, locate, and quantify individuals and groups involved with the efforts. In part, this reflects the nature of the most important theater of war, social media. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. Social media. This author identifies as the most important theater of war, and sadly, he's probably not wrong. Social media is one of the major catalyzing elements that there is today. It's as close to a direct line into the human brain as we could get at this point, technologically. Social media. It takes everything that was developed through television and radio and print media and adds another layer and element to it where it is personalized. And being such, it has a massive influence on the human psyche. And through social media, and through this combination of images and words, the image being key of utmost importance in all of this, using these tools, it can infer archetypes into the human unconscious. And these archetypes that reside in the human unconscious eventually come to a conscious manifestation of sorts through a change in behavior. And we've seen this across the board. And one of the key vectors that they use to get this kind of programming done is data collection. We are living in an era of big data, and of course Cambridge Analytica, that whole scandal that erupted, was all about this data collection and how they have weaponized this data against the masses. And it could be argued that this Cambridge Analytica, its parent company called the SCL Group, changed the course of politics and the election here. They gave Trump talking points to go out there and say, told him just how to act, and a lot of people really bought into this narrative that he's an outsider to the political world and that he sees things the way we do, and he got a lot of people backing him. And he changed political affiliations in the process because up until his run for presidency, he always was a Democrat. Now, all of a sudden, when it's politically expedient, now he's a Republican, and he's conservative, and he's all about family values. You know, this guy that hooked up with strippers and models. And I digress on that. This bastion of family values himself is now all about family values. Do you see the power of this type of influence on people's minds. It's all on the backside of data collection. They know how to tailor-make things to affect people's emotional states and make them believe in something, no matter how ridiculous it may seem. And this has been leveraged in this way, so we have these opposing factions now. We have this pro-conservative type of a magical group. It's not really a real group. It's a grouping of people, of ideals, a grouping of opinions, similar opinions, like-mindedness, directed in a specific point, that point being Trump. You see, they'll hand you the focal point, and you direct your energies toward that focal point. This is what was done here on both sides. They handed you this catalyst. Here you go. Here's this focal point to focus on. So everything was Trump, Trump, Trump. 24/7. Even still, today, the media is still fixated on this guy for some reason. And of course, we know the reasons. If you've been following my work here for any length of time, you understand the reasons why they want to keep him focused front and center. Well, this is going to be the focal point once again. All this has been handed to us for a reason, and this is going to be the culmination of some of these occult or magical theater, and it's all theater, folks. It's all stagecraft, all of it. The magic resistance is primarily organized around a collection of hashtags such as Magic Resistance or Bind Trump. As for the cult of Keck, its very existence outside of a strand of memes is debatable, and the intent of the anonymous posters who invented it is ambiguous at best. What follows, then, is a rough sketch of key developments along with basic historical contextualization and identification of some individuals and texts that are illustrative of the developments. We will enter the story with the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States and the emergence of the magic resistance and its magic reaction. We will then work our way backwards to see how Trumpism turned esoteric via the alt-right's strategic orientation towards meta-politics and a post-ironic interest in chaos magic associated with the cult of Keck. And I'm going to pause for a moment right there, folks. So this guy has some very real insights into the machinations of this. And I think this is actually so far a pretty good analysis of things that have been done. And certainly, this author is going about it in the right way, working backwards towards this Trumpism turned esoteric through the alt-right. Working backwards. This is one of the keys. It's called retroduction. And oftentimes it's the best way to really analyze what's gone on. And this is something that was known and used by the alchemists of antiquity and has been lost very much so today. So the magic resistance synchronized spellcasting to bind Donald J. Trump. That witchcraft, and it's in quotation marks here, had entered the American political landscape first became common knowledge nearly a month after Trump's inauguration on January 20th, 2017. On the 16th of February, Michael M. Hughes, an author and lecturer on the occult, published A Spell to Bind Donald Trump and All Those Who Abet Him on the online publishing platform Medium. The text outlined a ritual to be performed at midnight on every waning crescent moon until he is removed from office. The first such event took place on February 24th, 2017. To perform the simple ritual, the practitioner would need an unflattering photo of Trump, the Tower Tarot card, and a stub of an orange candle, in addition to various ingredients representing the four elements and other magical principles. Gonna pause for a moment here, folks. The Tower card. Remember the Tower card. Oh, these things always seem to leverage off of other events. You see, there's real energies present with this stuff. And you'll notice the representation here, an orange candle, of course. And very unflattering, but that's exactly what they did. And they set this up, and this is actually a real ritual. No lie. They really did this. There were people that actually did this stuff. Let's read on here. The practitioner should write Donald J. Trump on the orange candle stub, arrange items in a pleasing circle, and say a prayer for protection, and invoke blessings from their preferred spirit or deity. Experienced magicians were additionally instructed to perform an appropriate banishing ritual. In the incantation, the practitioner would implore the gods of their choice in order to bind Donald Trump, and it actually gives the little invocation here, but I'm not going to read the invocation here. But you get the idea. So they would say this invocation, they would burn the candle with Donald Trump's name on it and have an unflattering picture of him, and they would summon the deity of their choice, or the demon spirit of their choice, however you want to view this, to bind Donald Trump and those who allegedly follow him. Now that's a pretty broad generalization. Think about that. Does your average Trump supporter have any inkling whatsoever of what really goes on behind the scenes? Probably not. They're probably just your average Republican that just votes Republican because they don't like what the Democrats do, much like the Democrats don't like what the Republicans do, so they just vote Democrat, straight ticket, and we end up with what we end up with. But at any rate, think about this. So now you have these magical energies being unleashed on common people who may be supporters of Trump, not just Trump himself. And look at the results we've had in society, all this division we've had on political lines since then. Anyway, let's continue on. So after these people, after they said the little spell here, they gave the little incantation, then they take that unflattering photo of Trump, and it's lit on fire from the flame of the stub of the orange candle and held above an ashtray until it crumbles to dust as the practitioner, with increasing passion, speaks more words of incantation, which I won't read here. Hugh's ritual quickly gathered steam on social media. Shared with the hashtags Magic Resistance and Bind Trump, it was picked up by mass media after singer Lana Del Rey tweeted a cryptic picture of herself on February 23rd dressed in black and performing a hand sign in front of a red background with the text, "At the stroke of midnight, February 24th, March 26th, April 24th, May 23rd, listing the dates of the upcoming new moons. With a pop star's endorsement, magazines such as Elle, Dazed, Vanity Fair, and Vox soon published stories on the Bind Trump movement. When Michael Hughes got together with friends to perform the first binding ritual in Baltimore on February 24th, it was, as he later put it, quote, the culmination of an extraordinarily surreal week of intense international press coverage, non-stop phone and email interviews, all accompanied by my growing sense that I had not merely written a humorous spell that had gone viral, but had unknowingly assisted in the birth of something far bigger, end quote. And I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. So now you know you had this Lana Del Rey put this into the limelight. So whatever your thoughts are on these musicians and Hollywood stars who hit it big, whether you think they're clueless, useful idiots for the power structure, and they don't really know what it is they're doing when they're talking about these occult type things, you're entitled to that belief, but some of them know perfectly well what they're doing. Some of them don't. Some of them do. So when they're up there showing the hand signs and stuff like that, Illuminati confirmed, this kind of thing, it's become a popular thing. Some of them are just doing that for the attention or because they think they're in the big club. And some of them, they really know a little something about it and try to put it into practice. That is what really was a springboard for a lot of this. So now the guy who wrote the initial spell here and suggested the initial spell, he acknowledges it was assisting the birth of something far bigger. Now, something like this, that takes a manifestation of its own, can be categorized in a number of different ways by those who know about magic within the occult systems. Some would call it a type of egregore, or a tulpa, or a servitor. These are different types of thought forms. I'm not sure exactly what kind of characterization something like this would get. But it's a spirit that is empowered by the energies directed towards it by people, and it takes on a kind of existence of its own, separate from what the creator of it intended. And it seems to circulate, like memes do. It's meme magic. That's essentially what's been done with a lot of this, and we'll see how it all ties together, because it all harkens on different archetypal concepts, all encapsulated in one image. And so it confers a lot of power in that way. And sometimes, with people focusing on this, it directs energies into that thing. And I know this is probably a bridge too far for most people to want to accept. But there are real energies involved with this. Not quite sure how it all exactly works, or how you can maybe scientifically describe it to somebody, but certainly these things have merit. These ideas have merit. They've been with us for a very long time, and people in positions of power in this world certainly utilize these concepts. And why do they do it? Because it works. Even if you can't explain how it works, it does work. And that's what is being demonstrated here. So regardless of what your stance is on this notion of magic or the power of memes or any such thing, you can objectively look at it and see there was a real effect to some of this. Now you could argue about what exactly the full manifestation of a victory of some ritual like this would look like. Hard to say. But you could see it did have an inherent effect on the minds of the masses. But let's continue on here, because we're running low on time already. Binding rituals have continued to be performed on every new moon since the initial event in February 2017. Just how many have participated is hard to assess, given the distributed and decentralized structure of these events. Rituals have been performed individually, in small groups, and occasionally in public as a visible form of protest performance. Hughes estimated monthly participation in the thousands. The official Magic Resistance Facebook group had 4,968 members in January of 2020. But this, of course, is not a reliable indication of how many have participated in synchronized spellcasting. If use of the movement's hashtags give us a sound indication, it would appear that engagement has waned since the initial enthusiasm in early 2017. A keyhole search on the hashtags Magic Resistance and Bind Trump in April 2018 revealed that fewer than 15 Twitter users deployed the hashtags in a random week. Although the reach of their tweets, i.e. unique users exposed to them, was considerably higher, at close to 30,000. Similarly, an analysis through the branding tool RightTag shows how the two tags are related to each other. Much more successful hashtags such as Impeach Trump and the Resistance. This gives an indication that despite the media hype in 2017, the Magic Resistance persisted as a marginal subsection of a much bigger demographic of political discontents. So I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. Well, much like the rest of various groups in society, the occultist subculture within all those groups is a very small margin, largely, as well. So I would expect something like this. Yes, it seems like a marginal number of people to be involved with it, but occultism in and of itself is something that's kind of done in the background, on the down low, by a lot of these people who claim to be practicing magicians. It's a very small minority of society that fall into that category. But at any rate, we can see how it represents a subculture within the demographic. And that's what's being demonstrated here. So it was not necessarily a massive movement, but it got enough media attention that it had an effect. And of course, if you have 30,000 some odd people directing their energies in a certain direction, that can have a very real impact as well. Let's read on. So regardless of its actual outreach, the magic resistance is best described as a social media coordinated protest movement leveraging the trappings of magic and witchcraft to mobilize resistance against the incumbent United States president and his administration. By emphasizing the trappings of magic, I am not suggesting that sincerity of belief in magic efficacy is entirely absent. The movement has sparked theological debates among pagans and magicians over issues such as the ethics of casting binding spells, how the efficacy of the spells are mediated, i.e., whether demonic entities might be involved, and of course, whether the effect of the casting is likely to be as intended or instead produce a magical backlash. Nevertheless, there is little doubt that the magic resistance initial mobilization in the winter of 2017 was primarily driven by the striking images, material objects, magical circles, tarot cards, and other external trappings of magic that were photographed, filmed, and shared in social media. The aesthetics of magic carried the movement's reach far outside of the limited population of practicing magicians. The driving force was not so much the literal belief in the magical efficacy of binding spells as the successful engagement of people's emotions through the subversive power associated with magic and witchcraft in the popular imaginary. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. So essentially, this highlighted some of these occult precepts to the masses. That's what was done here. So now more people had been introduced into some of these ideologies and methodologies that have been used for a long time. So even if they thought, well, this is nonsense and it's silly, but they were on the same page politically, they didn't necessarily object to it. They wanted the same goals as these people. And all the while, being introduced to it in the way they were, they didn't necessarily buy into it, into its efficacy or its power at all. But it put this idea, this archetype, directly into the public mind. Put it front and center, and now it's a lot more accepted today than it was back in 2017. This notion of people identifying as pagans or witches or magicians or some such thing, or just being spiritual. All these things have been normalized to some degree or another, primarily through social media. And we see that. That's an effect of this. So now we have all of these different alternative ideas as to religions or spiritualities, paths, spiritual paths. All of these different things that have really taken hold in a good portion of the subculture out there. And like I said, that's one of the major influences here. So now we have this notion out there in mainstream social media networks being presented to people who would not have even thought of anything like that prior, wouldn't have given any credence to it. And they've turned it into a type of comedy, especially when you get to this cult of Keck stuff that we'll be touching on here before we sign off. It's become kind of a laughing stock, but it's had real influences on the human mind. It's kind of like an earworm. Think of an earworm, one of those tunes that you hear it and then you can't get it out of your head. Same kind of thing with some of these political type cartoons or memes that have come out. Once it's there, it's emblazoned in your brain forever. It's the use of symbols to instantiate an archetype into the unconscious mind. Gives you a certain feeling, gives you a certain impression, and sometimes, even if you think it's silly, it leaves a lasting effect on you. It leaves that lasting impression. May change your attitude about a certain thing. That's the power of this. So regardless of what your stance is on it, understand it's the same kind of thing. You can't unsee it or you can't unhear it once you've seen it or heard it. But let's go ahead and continue on. The magic reaction. The Golden Dawn goes pro-Trump. The rise of the magic resistance in February 2017 also spurred a counter-movement of Trump-supporting occultists attempting to thwart the binding spells and empower the president. This magic reaction was spearheaded by David Griffin and Leslie McQuaid, the Nevada-based leaders of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. one of the many successor organizations to the influential late 19th century magical order named the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It was the entry of Griffin and McQuaid that transformed the magical engagement with United States politics into a multilateral conflict between occultists of different political persuasions. It was also Griffin who started labeling the conflict a magic war. In order to understand why Griffin and McQuaid have taken this active role and adopted martial metaphors for describing it, it is necessary to take a brief look at Griffin's background. Griffin has been a controversial figure in the magical scene since the 1990s. He appears to have been initiated into the Golden Dawn tradition in 1992 by Chris Monaster, formerly Patricia Beeman, a former lover and disciple of Israel Regardie, and elevated to the degree of Adeptus Major in 1994. Griffin's growing involvement coincided with a conflict between Monaster and Sheikh Cicero, another Regardie student, and the founder in the late 1970s of the Regardie line of the Golden Dawn. It is notable that the notion of magic war was already very much part of how Griffin experienced the Golden Dawn schism. For example, he attributed the Northridge, California earthquake in January of 1994, which devastated parts of Los Angeles, where Griffin and Monaster were at the time, to a magical attack by Sheikh Cicero. Shortly after, Monaster tasked Griffin, who had been residing part-time in Sweden, with opening the Isis Nut Temple in Stockholm. From this European base, Griffin led the Monaster line's efforts to balance Cicero's push towards trademarking the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn brand in the United States by seeking a parallel trademark under European legislation. The effort succeeded in 1998 with the result that the Golden Dawn trademark was split between the organizations in different jurisdictions, the Monaster-Griffin lines HOGD in Europe and the Cicero's lines HOGD incorporated in the United States. Griffin has had a strong internet presence since the late 1990s. The so-called Golden Dawn flame wars that erupted around the schisms and legal battles were conducted largely online through the exchange of incendiary attacks and allegations on websites, forums, and blogs, while mutual attacks between warring Golden Dawn factions has muted over the previous decade. Griffin has continued to pursue an aggressive social media strategy. His Golden Dawn blog, which has attracted more than 1.4 million readers since it opened in 2009, contains a mixture of HOGD announcements, occult instruction videos, and personal attacks on people in the occult community with whom Griffin does not get along. Since the 2016 presidential campaign, these elements have become increasingly mixed with political content and conspiracy theories. Griffin was emphatically anti-Hillary Clinton during the campaign, publishing a number of posts on the blog attacking mainstream media, milking the leak of the personal emails of John Podesta, then chairman of the Clintons' presidential campaign, in March 2016, and alleging contacts between Clinton's inner circle and the Ku Klux Klan. These posts often appear motivated by the fact that rival personalities in the occult milieu displayed pro-Clinton stances on social media. Since Trump's election, however, Griffin's anti-Hillary sentiments developed into a decisively pro-Trump stance. Once again, the main catalyst of this development appears to have been a reaction to what other magicians were doing, in this case Michael Hughes' binding spell. Starting on the 24th of February 2017, the date of the first new moon ritual, Griffin published the first of a string of posts attacking the Bind Trump movement, which he described with increasingly fantastical language as a gang of black magicians, traitors, Satanist terrorists, and crypto-fascist witches whose real objective is to establish globalist world empire. Griffin's response to the threatening army of witches was to mobilize a broad front of pro-Trump spiritual practitioners, forming an interfaith coalition of diverse magical and religious practices to thwart the magical resistance's efforts. I'm going to pause for a moment here, folks. This is the kind of stuff that these lunatics in these secret society groups do. Especially these more magic system-leaning ones, like the Golden Dawn, like the OTO, and even the highest, most levels of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. This is the kind of stuff they do, and they're at odds with one another, sometimes, with a lot of this stuff, and they wage magical wars against each other. And believe me, this stuff that goes on with these secret society groups like this, it spills over into the political realm and the political theater, as we see here. You don't hear about this too much exposed in public, but this infighting goes on within these various groups, and these people, whether they have any real power or influence or not, they seem to think they do. And this is how they often do things. They attack one another behind the scenes. They argue and they bicker as to who's the legit representation of the organization. The same thing went on with the Rosicrucians 100 years ago. Same thing. There was a schism in the Rosicrucians, and one group claimed to be the real Rosicrucians, and the other one claimed to be the real Rosicrucians. And they took these battles to court and everything else, and were derogatory towards one another, and accused each other of being black magicians and doing all this bad stuff, when on both sides they were both at fault in many ways, much like what's going on here that's being revealed here with this Golden Dawn bit, as we see. But at any rate, let's get to the point here where we get to the cult of Keck before we sign off. Later in the spring, Griffin and McQuaid offered an online black magic self-defense workshop marketed particularly to regular people who might feel impacted by the Magic Resistance's targeting of all those who abet Trump. In May, Griffin registered the domain magicwars.com, which collected material related to the standoff. The website had a download link to magical self-defense material, but consisted mainly of YouTube videos, including conspiratist material from Alex Jones's InfoWars channel. Gonna pause for a moment there. So now we have the alt-right connection right there. As with the Magic Resistance, it is hard to estimate how many participated in Griffin's counterspell efforts and what exactly they were doing. In contrast to the Magic Resistance's fixed but open source ritual template, Griffin's invitation was entirely non-committal, inviting practitioners from different traditions to do whatever felt right for them. Prayer, positive thinking, the law of attraction, and magic were all welcome, as long as the intention of the workings remained the same: to counter the witches and protect the president. In addition to private rituals, however, Griffin and McQuaid also performed a public ritual at the Donald Trump Star on Hollywood Boulevard. This theatrical spell to liberate humanity and break enchantments was filmed and published on the Golden Dawn YouTube channel, accompanied by a place between magic and performative counter-protest in public space, not dissimilar in method from the public demonstrations performed in the name of the Magic Resistance. And now, before we sign off, the cult of Keck. The emergence of a post-ironic magico-political religion. Before the war between magicians over President Trump, there was the cult of Keck, best described as the place where occultism intersected with online image board culture, and the alt-right. The background of the cult of Keck can be found in the attempt by a group of 4chan users to troll politically correct liberals with internet memes. Articulate participants tended to couch this weaponization of memes as a form of meta-politics, denoting the strategy of pursuing political goals by targeting general culture rather than entering electoral politics directly. Meta-politics is now, or by now, a long-standing strategy of the extreme right, originating in far-right ideologues' appropriation of Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony. A prominent example is the publishing front Arctos Media, created in 2009 through a merger of the small Danish publisher Integral Tradition Publishing and the Swedish neo-Nazi publishing company Nordiska Forlaget. Arctos Media exemplifies the rebranding of right-wing extremism through a rapprochement with traditional spirituality of the sort inspired by perennialist René Guénon and far-right esoteric thinker Julius Evola, and an emphasis on terms like civilization, culture, and identity. This sort of entryism, by which right-wing ideologues reach a new audience interested in esotericism and spiritual traditions, was an element of the cult of Keck discourse as well. Metapolitical use of memes to spread far-right content to the mainstream was a key context for the emergence of the cult of Kek, but its origins were stranger and in a sense more magical than that. Through a string of coincidences and contingencies that could probably only have taken place on an image board, where hundreds of thousands of messages are posted anonymously at high pace every day, elements of modern occultism were woven into the emerging alt-right's blend of tactics, ideology, and interpretations of unfolding events. The result was the birth of an online religion situated somewhere between parody, make-believe, metapolitical strategy, genuine messianic expectations, and magic. The leading Cult of Kek website referred to itself as post-ironic, which seems an apt description for much of what has been going on in this corner of the internet. The tone of irony and satire was central to the movement's activities, but its very persistence, aggression, and focused cultivation of negative effect betrayed underlying moods and motivations that were anything but playful. So we have the Cult of Kek, and we have Pepe the Frog, the symbols of the Cult of Kek, and this springboarded into the mainstream, into politics, warring factions within the magical fraternities. The magic of politics, folks. The arrival of the meme as a very real force in this world. That's what was established here, and this is still going on today. There's still this meta-politics going on, fought by the esotericists and the occultists behind the scenes, and it spills over into the real world and into the world of politics, the stagecraft that is the show of politics. The premise here, there's power in the meme, folks. Keep on memeing out there. Anyway, that is all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you, I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.